February 19th, 1987. A quiet town in Michigan. A woman leaves a bowling alley, says goodnight to her husband, and drives home alone. 45 minutes later, her husband walks through the front door. What he finds will haunt him and investigators for the next 35 years. Her name was Roxanne Wood, and the man everyone suspected was completely innocent. Stay with me, because the way this case was finally solved will change everything you think you know about justice. Roxanne Wood was 30 years old, married, living a normal life in Niles Township, Michigan, a small, close-knit community where everyone knew everyone. That Thursday evening, she and her husband Terry had dinner together, then headed to their favorite local bowling alley to spend time with friends. Nothing unusual, just a regular night. But Roxanne left earlier than Terry. They had driven separate cars. Terry arrived home 45 minutes after her. The back door was open. Inside the kitchen, a broken frying pan on the floor, a knife that didn't belong, and Roxanne, lifeless, on the ground. She had been beaten, assaulted, and her throat had been slashed. Terry called the police immediately. Michigan State Police arrived and declared it a homicide within hours. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. Not because of what they found, but because of who they suspected. In any murder investigation, the first suspect is almost always the person closest to the victim. And so Terry Wood, the grieving husband who had just found his wife's body, became the primary suspect. For 35 years, Terry Wood lived under that shadow. Think about that for a moment. You lose your wife in the most violent way imaginable, and then, for 3.5 decades, the community around you whispers your name. Investigators had DNA evidence from the scene, semen, a blood stain on the outside of the back door, physical proof that someone else was there that night. But the technology of 1987 wasn't enough to identify who it belonged to, and so the case went cold. Michigan State Police reopened it in 2001. Nothing. They reopened it again in 2020. This time, everything changed. In 2020, investigators sent the original DNA sample to a company called Identifinders International, run by Dr. Colin Fitzpatrick, one of the world's leading experts in genetic genealogy. The DNA sample was degraded, aged, barely usable. Most labs would have turned it away. But Dr. Fitzpatrick's team managed to build a genetic profile using just 3% of what is normally required, the lowest amount ever used successfully in a cold case at that time. They uploaded it to genealogy databases, and they started building a family tree, backwards. Within days, they had narrowed it down to 3 brothers living in the area. Then a Western Michigan University cold case team, made up of students, not professional detectives, spent 8 months cataloging over 3,000 pages of case files, 1,200 hours of work, and one name kept appearing near the top of the list: Patrick Wayne Gilham, 67 years old, living in South Bend, Indiana, just 4 miles from where Roxanne Wood was killed. He had a criminal past. He had lived in the area in 1987, but investigators needed proof, so they waited. They watched. And one day, Patrick Gilham dropped a cigarette on the ground. Michigan State Police collected it. The results came back, 1 in 958.8 trillion. That's the probability that the DNA on that cigarette butt and the DNA left at Roxanne Wood's murder scene belonged to 2 different people. For all practical purposes, it was him. Investigators brought Gilham in for a voluntary interview in July 2021. They didn't reveal why. They kept it casual. Then Detective Sergeant Jason Bailey asked a simple question. Do you know anybody by the name of Roxanne? Gilham thought for a moment. I know two Roxannes, he said. One's a stripper, one's a drug addict. They showed him a photo of Roxanne Wood. That girl look familiar? You ever met her before? Gilham looked at the photo. Nope, never met her. 4 words. Then Bailey pushed slightly further. And Gilham said 3 more. I got to talk to my lawyer. On February 17th, 2022, exactly 35 years and 1 day after Roxanne Wood's murder, Patrick Wayne Gilham was arrested at his home in South Bend, Indiana. Gilham pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to a minimum of 23 years in prison. At 67 years old, that likely means the rest of his life behind bars. At the sentencing, Roxanne's sister Janet stood up and said, his actions gave all of us a life sentence, while he got to live most of his as a free man. But by the grace of God and the right detectives and modern technology, he was found. And Terry Wood, the man who spent 35 years under suspicion for a crime he didn't commit, finally heard the words he had waited decades for. Roxanne Wood was 30 years old when she